Let me share my screen. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, ICH CAP, for this opportunity to join the webinar. And hello, colleagues. The case that I will be presenting today about ICH and inclusive community is about the Sea people in Thailand. So in Thailand, we call these people Chao, which means sea people, or formerly we knew them as sea nomads, but now they didn't have a chance to travel extensively as before. Let me show you in the map in southern Thailand, southwestern Thailand, where we have this arrow pointing to, is the home to the sea nomads for several centuries. And you can see the photo of them being on boat, of having temporary shelters on shore, and more settled, like having a wooden house, larger and larger communities. So in Thailand, with the Chao, we have the population of about 12,000, a total of 45 villages, and they are only in southern part of Thailand because we have a coastal area. These people are indigenous groups. They used to roam, some groups used to live on boats and travel around in their small boats. Sometimes they make temporary settlement on islands and along coastal areas, especially during monsoon season when the sea is too rough to travel, when there are a lot of storms. But as I mentioned, and I think as the keynote speech, that nowadays the development and also tourism policy also affect the life of these indigenous population. So now all groups in Thailand are sedentary. But luckily at present, the marine and maritime knowledge and skills remain significant in some communities. So in spite of modernity, they are able to maintain some of their knowledge and skills. The skills are sometimes mentioned as reading the water to remember the wind and reading the sky to remember the star. And I'd like to make some specific focuses on some of the ICH of these people. The main one is boats. So without boats, they couldn't be sea people. So the three groups have their own traditional, unique forms of boats. I'd like to mention the first one, the top one is Kabang, the Morgan boat, that sometimes were their home during the dry season. And the bottom one, the Prahu of the Urakla. We can call this as the art and heart of marine livelihoods. And after tsunami, our team got the funding from UNESCO and UNDP to document some of the boat building craft and some of the social implications of this. So for these boats, they are vehicles and homes that form floating community in the old days, especially for the Morgan, the most nomadic of all three groups. In the old days, they were human and wind-powered boats. So you can imagine sustainable and self-sufficient matter that these boats brings to the community. The boats allow access to resources in a sustainable manner in that their mobility, being sea nomads, make the national resource appropriation spread in wider areas. So they are not concentrated in one area. The environment, the ecology is not degraded because of this mobility. So their mobility is also linked with sustainable use of resource. The other factor is that frequent travels and visits help them to maintain strong ties with their groups. So their groups are actually large, but the settlement or the floating communities are quite small because they have to travel a lot. They are able to maintain the ties with their boats. So actually the sea is not the obstacle. The sea is the route to different resources, to different places and communities for them to visit. And I'd like to mention that the Morgan Kabang, their traditional boat, has been declared Thailand National Intangible Cultural Heritage by Thailand Ministry of Culture in 2018. Prahu and Kabang traditional boats also facilitate access to places, and I'd like to mention the issue that is tied with ICH, in that marine knowledge and skills are also reflected in place names in the Chao language. And now it's a concern that most of the names have been forgotten or have been replaced by Thai names. So these names, they are representation of collective memories of landscape and seascape, and they further reaffirm the long history and close connection between themselves as their social beings and the sea. Another issue is that by being maritime and marine population, they have interesting rituals and ceremonies that the whole community helps in preparing and organizing. Friends and relatives from other communities also join in, so sometimes they switch the day in order to allow other from the other communities to join in. So it's a large celebration like you saw in the photos. The ceremonies and the rituals also signify the change of the monsoon season. So the ceremonies are usually organized in April, May, or in October, where there's a change or transition of the season, which also signifies that they are really sea people who move. The movement along the sea and coastal areas also dictated by this rhythm, natural rhythm of the sea. These ceremonies and rituals affirm their maritime and marine knowledge, because even young generations participate in this ceremony and learn about symbolic meanings of boat building, of seasons, of the knowledge that has passed through generations. And it also creates the sense of community, social bond, collectivity, and inclusivity. Another interesting issue following from having the boats, traditional boats, is that the boats have been downscaled, meaning that the male members of the community can make miniature boats that are really detailed down to scale of the big boats. And this has been made firstly into toys for children to learn about boats. But large boats like the Prahu and Kabang is now a dying art of making the real traditional boats, because large trees are hard to find. And the trees are mostly found in the national park, reserve forest, or private property where it's difficult to access. Some men, especially the elderly, still have the vivid memory of boat crafting, so they can make miniature boats for being toys for the children. And they have the potential of bringing income from tourism, being tourism souvenirs. But unluckily, they are not being promoted as tourist souvenirs because they are exclusively sold in the communities. So the sales are quite limited. Another issue is the knowledge of marine areas and coastal areas also affirm food security and social connectivity and collectivity. I won't mention the general knowledge of the entire population, but I'd like to focus on the knowledge on fallback resources, meaning that the resources that are there and easily accessible by women, by children, by elderly, and sometimes by the disabled in the community. And these enable these people to simply walk off to the beach and strand area to find shellfish, crabs, sea urchin, and other marine food to sustain their living. And sometimes they sell these fish and shellfish as a means to extra income. So not only food security, but some of the extra income for the family. And the roles of marine knowledge and skills also affirm this food security and social connectivity, in that the principle of food sharing is really significant in the three groups of sea people. It's practically part of everyday lives. So they have strong social and emotional ties to their community. And we can observe that even those who intermarry, who marry from outside communities, usually remain within the communities. And it's the outsiders who usually move in the community. There's also an issue with this practice, but we won't have time to mention or elaborate on this. I'd like to say that with food sharing, the principle of food sharing in the crisis of COVID-19 became the inspiration for all, and it has been covered by the newspaper and news source in Thailand. In that Chao communities, they have a lot of fish, and they dry this extra fish. They have the exchange scheme with the Korean community, another group of indigenous people, especially in mountainous area that have rotational farming, growing rice. So the Korean communities have extra rice. The Chao community, the Sea people communities have extra fish and dry fish. So they exchange, amidst of this difficulty of being locked down, being difficult to earn monetary income. So this is an extension of community food security into exchange between Korean communities and Chao community. So we observe that often neglected knowledge and skills became the inspiration and hope for urban populations, because in urban settings, when lockdown, meaning that we need to go to supermarket or we need to stock up our food, it's really difficult to exchange. We need money to buy food in order to survive during lockdown. Like I mentioned, modernization and modernity saw these skills and knowledge dwindling. So there's attempt in revitalizing ICH. Like I mentioned, after tsunami, we got generous funding from UNESCO and other donors to do the trails, to document some of the knowledge and skills. These trails are interesting in that it's the traditional trails of the Morgan to walk to get their food and medicine in the forest. So they're not only good in the coastal areas and in the sea, they're good in the forest, beach forest, mangrove forest, or island forest as well. So we made this into a trail where visitors and outsiders could learn about their ethnobotany and learn about their knowledge and skills that are dying. And in some schools, especially Koh Lipeh School in Stun province, we have indigenous teacher who's really keen on safeguarding these knowledge. And she had one classroom, and you can see the mural of the class depicting the original history of the sea people roaming around. So we have knowledge class provided in school by progressive teachers like this. And these pictures are the additional knowledge camp that our team provided for the school. It's very easy to have this kind of camp, when we have dedicated teachers and interested children eager to learn about maritime and marine livelihood, although their life nowadays are quite limited in terms of earning income and going out to sea, but at least, they can learn and maintain the pride and identity of the knowledge. So this is my last slide, and I'd like to sum up that the title of my presentation, The Ties and Ties of Knowledge, signify that maritime and marine knowledge are sources of connectivity, collectivity, inclusiveness, and community cohesion, and it can be extended beyond the communities itself. Although the knowledge and skills of the Chao, the sea people, are like tides, that's the analogy to tides that can ebb, and come up again. The tides of knowledge can be revitalized if natural resources are recuperated and regenerated, and importantly, if market economy and modernity and also conservation policy are adjusted for the benefits of traditional communities. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you very much.